A man attacked an elderly woman without realizing that her rescued dog was a highly skilled former police officer. What happened during their confrontation? This dramatic, unexpected, and emotional story is sure to touch your heart. If you love intense and captivating stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Grace was an elderly woman cherished by everyone in the small suburban neighborhood of Lake Oswego. Her silver hair was always neatly styled, and her face carried a gentle smile. Walking faithfully beside her was Rex, a large German shepherd with glossy black fur and piercing eyes that never stopped scanning his surroundings. Rex was always by her side, like a devoted guardian. Rex came into Grace's life through her nephew, Officer James. Rex had been trained to become a police K-9, but failed to meet the rigorous standards required for duty. Instead of leaving him without a purpose, James sought a loving home for him. When Grace met Rex, she adopted him immediately. From that day on, Rex became an inseparable part of her life. Whenever she stroked his head, Grace would smile and whisper, "We're a team, aren't we, Rex?" He would respond with a deep, unwavering gaze, never taking his eyes off her. Their mornings were usually peaceful. Grace would hold Rex's leash and walk him along the small gravel roads, always stopping by the local bakery for a fresh loaf of bread. On their way, she greeted her neighbors warmly, while Rex stayed close, walking calmly but keeping his ears perked and his sharp eyes scanning everything around them. But that morning, everything was different. Rex was no longer his calm, composed self. His steps slowed, his body stiffened, and his head turned sharply from side to side, as though searching for something. His ears stood tall, and his nose sniffed the air constantly. Occasionally, he stopped abruptly, glancing back at Grace as if sensing something unusual. "Rex, what's wrong?" Grace asked softly, patting his neck in an attempt to reassure him. But Rex's reaction didn't change. He pulled on the leash, guiding her toward home, as though urging her to return immediately. Grace let out a light laugh, trying to brush off the unease. "Maybe you smell something strange. Let's just get the bread and head back, okay?" As she entered the bakery, Grace felt the comforting warmth of freshly baked bread, but her eyes suddenly froze. Through the window, she saw two men standing across the street. They were talking, but their eyes were fixed on her. Their unblinking, focused gaze sent a chill down her spine. "It's probably nothing," she told herself, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. But outside, Rex thought otherwise. He stood tall, his muscles tense like a coiled spring ready to release. His lips curled back slightly, revealing his teeth, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. His sharp eyes locked onto the two men. Mark, one of the men, nudged Luke and murmured, "She lives alone, just her and the dog. Looks like an easy target." Luke nodded, his eyes following Grace as she exited the bakery. On the way home, Rex remained tense. His body stayed rigid. Every step weighted as though under an invisible pressure. Grace tried to lighten the mood. "Rex, you're acting so strange today. Like you've seen a ghost." Her voice carried a soft chuckle, but even she couldn't fully mask the unease creeping into her mind. Her footsteps unconsciously quickened, and soon they arrived back home. Once inside, Grace quickly closed and locked the door. Her hand gripped the key tightly before she stood still for a moment, ears straining for any unusual sound. The silence was unnerving, but when she glanced down at Rex, her worry deepened. Rex stood by the door like a statue, his back stiff and the fur along his spine bristling. A low, sharp growl rumbled from his throat, his gaze fixed on the door as if something dangerous lurked just beyond it. Across the street, shrouded in the darkness of an alley, Mark and Luke stood motionless. Their eyes, sharp and focused like daggers, pierced through the night toward Grace's house. Mark leaned slightly, a wicked grin curling his lips as he muttered, "Just an old lady and her dog. What could she possibly do?" His tone was quiet, but brimming with arrogance. Luke furrowed his brow, his eyes locked on Rex's silhouette faintly visible through the window. "That dog doesn't look easy to deal with. But if we take care of him first, the rest will be simple." Mark nodded, his voice cold and resolute. "Tonight, we'll come back. When everything's quiet, she won't even know what hit her. Inside the house, Grace sat in her old armchair, a book in her hands, though her focus was far from its pages. Every few moments, her eyes darted to the window, her grip tightening on the book's cover each time the image of the two men across the street crossed her mind. Rex, too, was uneasy. He would pause frequently, his ears twitching at the faintest sound from outside, releasing a low growl every now and then. "Rex, what's gotten into you tonight?" Grace set her book down, her voice tinged with concern as she walked toward the door. Pressing her ear against it, she strained to hear anything unusual. But outside, all she could catch was the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze. "There's nothing out there, my friend," she murmured, her words soft as if to reassure herself more than Rex. Still, her eyes darted to him. His body remained taut, like stone, and his unwavering gaze stayed locked on the front door. As Grace turned off the lights and prepared for bed, she meticulously checked the windows and locks again. She couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling creeping into her chest. Rex's posture made it seem like he knew something was about to happen, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Outside, Luke's cold smile cut through the darkness. "That's it, Mark. All we need to do is wait." Mark didn't respond. His face darkened with focus, his eyes fixed with a calculated stare. "Tonight, we go in. She won't even know what hit her." Inside, Rex remained at his post, his eyes never leaving the front door. His body was coiled tight, like a taut string ready to snap. It was as though he could sense the danger inching closer, preparing to cross the threshold. Grace, lying in bed, couldn't shake the inexplicable weight pressing on her chest. Though she couldn't pinpoint it, something inside her whispered that this night would be unlike any other. In the early hours of the night, the house was enveloped in an eerie silence. Grace lay in bed, trying to rest, but Rex showed no signs of sleep. Every sound from outside made his body tense, and the low, guttural growls that rumbled from his throat were unmistakable warnings, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Suddenly, a faint noise came from outside the door, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible. But Rex froze instantly, his body lowering into a ready stance. His growl deepened, sharper this time, slicing through the quiet night. Grace stirred, her voice groggy as she mumbled, "Rex, what is it now?" Then came a loud crash. The door was kicked open, slamming against the wall, and Grace's scream pierced the air as two masked men, Mark and Luke, stormed into the house. Their faces were cold, threatening, their movements sharp and calculated. "Stay quiet, old lady," Mark barked, his twisted grin curling on his face as he advanced toward Grace. "We don't want to hurt you. Just give us something valuable." Grace staggered backward, her breathing rapid. One hand gripped the edge of the table tightly to steady herself as fear and panic took hold of her. But Rex didn't hesitate. With a ferocious growl, he launched himself at Mark like a missile. His sharp jaws locked onto Mark's arm, pulling him down to the floor. Mark writhed and kicked wildly, his face contorted in pain, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Get this damn dog off me," he screamed. "Luke, do something." Luke rushed forward, his hand reaching for a gleaming knife, aiming it at Rex. But Rex was quicker. He pivoted and attacked Luke with the same fierce determination, forcing him to stumble back. "This dog is going to kill us," Luke shouted, his voice high-pitched with panic. He drew another knife from his side and pointed it at Rex. "I'll end this right now." Grace, trembling and paralyzed by fear, could do nothing but watch as the scene unfolded before her. Her body felt frozen, her senses overwhelmed. Rex lunged again, his sharp teeth sinking deep into Luke's arm, sending him sprawling to the floor. The knife clattered against the ground as Luke let out a cry of pain, desperately trying to crawl away from the relentless dog. Mark scrambled to his feet, attempting to bypass Rex and get to Grace. But Rex quickly positioned himself in front of her, his body lowered, muscles taut like a coiled spring. A ferocious growl erupted from his chest, his bared teeth gleaming menacingly. Mark hesitated, his steps faltering under the weight of Rex's unrelenting stance. In a moment of adrenaline-fueled courage, Grace grabbed a heavy table lamp. With all her strength, she swung it at Mark, the impact leaving him dazed and staggering. Realizing they were outmatched, Luke clutched his injured arm, his eyes wide with panic. "Mark, let's get out of here. This dog will tear us apart." His voice cracked, trembling with fear. Mark, his face twisted with fury, glared at Grace. Through clenched teeth, he growled, "This isn't over, old lady." With that, he and Luke bolted into the night, their figures disappearing into the darkness. As the house fell silent once more, the stillness felt almost suffocating. Grace collapsed to her knees beside Rex, her hands trembling as she gently stroked his fur. His body was still tense, his chest heaving with labored breaths, yet his eyes remained fixed on the door, vigilant as ever. "Oh, Rex, you saved me," Grace whispered, her voice quivering as her fingers grazed his warm, soft fur. Her lips trembled as she spoke again, barely audible. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Rex, exhausted, lay down beside Grace. His body remained tense, his eyes sharp and watchful. That night, Grace realized that Rex was more than just a companion. He was her true protector. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently into the house, but Grace's heart still raced with fear. The memory of the break-in lingered like a nightmare. Looking at the broken door, her hands unconsciously traced the bruises on her wrist, a stark reminder that it had been all too real. In the kitchen, Rex rested, but even in his fatigue, his ears stayed alert, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger, ready to react to the slightest sound. After a calming cup of coffee, Grace picked up the phone, her trembling fingers dialing each number slowly. Her voice was shaky as she recounted the events to the police. Not long after, 2 officers arrived at the house. Rex sat close to Grace, his eyes tracking their every movement, his body tense, as if silently assessing potential threats. Officer David, a tall man with a kind expression, sat across from Grace. He listened attentively, his brows furrowing slightly as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned down and gently stroked Rex's head. "This dog is a true hero," he said, admiration shining in his eyes. "Not many dogs would fight like this to protect someone." Grace smiled softly, her hand gently running over Rex's head, her touch a mix of tenderness and resolve. "He's not just a hero," she replied warmly, her voice steady and full of emotion. "He's my family." However, the second officer spoke with a more serious tone. His voice was deep and firm, carrying a sense of urgency. "We understand your dog acted bravely, ma'am, but those men might come back. They know you live alone, and that could encourage them to try again. We recommend installing additional locks and, if possible, a security system." Grace nodded, her hand gripping the edge of the table as her shoulders slightly hunched. Her expression reflected a blend of worry and relief. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice resolute. "I need to feel safe." In the following days, Grace carefully took every precaution. She hired a technician to reinforce the locks and install a security system. Each time the doorbell rang, her chest tightened, a persistent sense of vigilance preventing her from fully relaxing. Rex shared her unease. He continued patrolling the house, moving from room to room. Whenever he heard a sound or caught sight of movement outside, he would stop, letting out a low, cautious growl. Grace watched her loyal companion, sensing that Rex still believed the danger wasn't entirely gone. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit alley, Mark leaned against a wall, one hand clutching his bandaged arm. His face was twisted in pain and anger, his bloodshot eyes glaring at Luke, who was gingerly rubbing his injured shoulder. "That dog ruined everything," Mark spat through clenched teeth, his voice filled with frustration. "Who would have thought it would be so vicious?" "It's just a dog," Luke replied, though his voice carried a hint of doubt. He winced as his fingers brushed the sore spot on his shoulder. "Next time, we'll be better prepared. It won't stand in our way again." Mark's expression hardened, his eyes turning cold and calculating. His voice was steely as he said, "Exactly. This time, we deal with it first." That old lady won't stand a chance. That night, Grace's kitchen glowed softly under the warm light. She rinsed a handkerchief, her hands trembling slightly as she wrung it dry. Rex, as if sensing her unease, stood beside her, his gaze fixed firmly on the door. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, breaking the silence. Grace knelt beside Rex, gently stroking his neck, trying to calm them both. "It'll be okay, Rex. We're prepared, and they won't come back, right?" Rex's dark eyes, intense and unwavering, seemed to say that if they did return, he would be there to protect her, no matter the cost. In that moment, Grace realized Rex was her only source of courage to face whatever lay ahead. The early hours in Lake Oswego were cold and still. Grace lay in bed, her hands clutching the edge of the blanket as she tried to steady her breathing. Yet the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. In the hallway, Rex sat like a sentinel, his sharp eyes locked on the front door, his ears perked, straining to catch the faintest sound. Then, a subtle noise broke the silence, a faint shuffle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Rex freeze. His front paws shifted slightly as if preparing to leap. A deep, threatening growl rumbled from his throat, cutting through the quiet. Half asleep, Grace mumbled, "Rex, what is it now?" Before she could rise, a metallic clinking sound made her blood run cold. Someone was tampering with the lock. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the stillness as the door was forced open. Grace screamed as Mark and Luke stormed into the house, their faces cold and eyes filled with grim determination. "Game's over, old lady," Mark bellowed, gripping a metal rod so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Did you really think we'd give up so easily?" Grace stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please, leave. I called the police last time, and you'll regret this." Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on the two men advancing toward her. Luke sneered, pulling out a knife as he slowly approached. "Not this time. We're not leaving empty-handed." Without hesitation, Rex launched himself at Mark. His fierce growl thundered through the room like a storm, filling the air with raw power. His sharp teeth clamped down on Mark's arm, dragging him to the floor. Grace stood frozen in fear, watching Rex fight with unwavering bravery. Her mind raced for a way out, but her concern for Rex held her paralyzed. "This damn dog," Mark yelled, writhing on the floor as he struggled to shake Rex off. "Luke, do something." Luke gripped his knife tightly, lunging toward Rex with intent. But Rex was faster, dodging the blade and immediately attacking Luke, slamming him hard against the wall. Rex didn't stop, his only focus was protecting Grace at all costs. Seeing an opening, Grace's trembling hands reached for the phone. Her fingers tapped the keys so quickly they almost fumbled. "Please, come quickly. They're here, and they're trying to hurt me." Her voice cracked, each word shaky and desperate as her breathing quickened. Luke, now panicked and battered, shouted, "Mark, we need to get out of here. This dog's going to kill us." Mark, his face flushed with rage, grabbed the metal rod lying nearby. He charged toward Rex, his eyes wild with fury. But Rex, driven by his fierce protective instinct, leapt forward again. The impact was so powerful that Mark was thrown back, the metal rod clattering to the floor. The red and blue lights flashed outside as the police arrived. Realizing there was no escape, Mark and Luke attempted to flee, but the officers quickly stormed in, weapons drawn, ordering them to the ground. One officer rushed to Grace, who was now kneeling beside Rex, sobbing with relief and gratitude. "It's all over now, ma'am. Thanks to this dog, we've caught them." Grace, her hands still trembling, stroked Rex's fur, feeling the rise and fall of his exhausted breaths. "You're my hero, Rex. My hero," she whispered, her voice low but overflowing with emotion. She leaned down and hugged Rex tightly, as if his presence alone could banish every ounce of fear. As the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, the first rays illuminated the scratched floor, a stark reminder of the battle fought the night before. The nightmare was over. The police had taken Mark and Luke into custody, and Grace knew it was Rex's courage and loyalty that had kept her safe. As she gently ran her hand over Rex's fur, Tears welled up in her eyes. He was exhausted, with a few minor scratches, yet his watchful eyes remained fixed on her, radiating the same protective intensity. Later that day, two officers returned to take a full statement and check on her well-being. Seeing Rex, Officer David, who had followed the case from the beginning, approached with admiration in his eyes. "Miss Grace, we'd like you to bring Rex to the police station. Our chief wants to award him a medal for his bravery." Grace looked at Rex, tears of pride filling her eyes as she gently touched his head. "A medal? You deserve the world, my good boy," she whispered, her smile warm and filled with love. That afternoon, Grace brought Rex to the police station, where the officers had arranged a small ceremony to honor him. Police officers and several neighbors, who had heard about the incident, gathered to see the heroic dog who had saved his owner from disaster. The police chief placed a gleaming medal around Rex's neck and addressed the crowd. "This dog is not just a hero to his owner, but a symbol of courage and loyalty for all of us. On behalf of the community, we thank him for his brave actions." Grace, struggling to hold back tears, looked at Rex with immense pride as applause filled the room. Rex, as usual, sat by her side, calm and composed, like a true guardian. That evening, back at home, Grace prepared a special meal for Rex, a hearty feast befitting a hero. While Rex ate, she sat in her old armchair, watching him and reflecting on everything they had been through together. Rex was more than just a dog. He was her strength, her support, and her inspiration. Throughout the evening, neighbors stopped by to offer their words of gratitude and encouragement. Among them was Mrs. Nancy, who brought a homemade cake and a bottle of wine. "Grace, we all know what Rex did for you. He's no longer just your hero. He's a hero to all of us." Grace smiled warmly, her voice trembling slightly as she replied, "Yes, Rex is truly special. He always has been. Now, he's the protector of us all." As the night fell, Grace and Rex sat together on the porch under a starry sky. Rex, still wearing his shiny medal, rested his head on her lap, finally at peace. Grace gently stroked his fur, feeling an overwhelming sense of safety, protection, and gratitude. "My dear Rex," Grace whispered, her voice soft, "you're more than a hero. You're my family, my friend. And I know that with you by my side, nothing can shake us." Under the quiet night sky and the gentle breeze, Grace and Rex sat silently, savoring the peace they had earned, with the unshakable belief that together they were unstoppable. Rex showed us the true meaning of courage and unwavering loyalty. What do you think about this heartfelt story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice can help spread the message of love and protection. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with your loved ones so they, too, can feel the warmth of Rex's loyalty. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. Together, let's spread beautiful stories that make life more meaningful. Wishing you happiness and peace always.